Michael, how you doing?
I'm acceptable. How are you?
I'm in San Francisco, so I am fine. I'm doing great. Lots of sunshine over here. I hope I gave you a fairly decent intro over here. I kind of joked around. We have actually bumped into each other before. I'll tell you a little secret. The last time we talked, we were talking a little bit about AI, and I believe he mentioned Pi AI. I'm going to go share my screen. Well, I'm just going to tell you. He mentioned Pi AI. I decided to look at it because I'd never heard of it. I knew Claude, I knew ChatGPT, and I went to Pi AI and started chatting with it, and it started hitting on me like it was my new girlfriend. Um, Artificial intelligence, and I think I laughed at the wrong point when Michael was talking about this, and he was like, "What's going on?" Like the AI is I don't know, trying to set up a date or something with me. It's very very strange. And I do know a little bit about your opinions on AI stuff over here, but I'll let you continue with that. So, without any further ado, Michael, the secret life of automation, it's all yours, man.
Thank you. Although I feel obliged to point out that which screen am I going to share here?
Now,
Chrome tab, entire screen. And as usual, it's not showing the screen. Oh, there. How about that one? Let's try sharing that. Yeah, that's me right there. Now you see I'm asking ChatGPT about myself because I'm only doing this because Paul, you mentioned. Are you still there? I don't see you in my version of the display. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if
stick around.
my mic was working. I'm always here.
Yeah. First of all, I think you're confabulating a little bit because I didn't introduce you to Pi AI. This is the first time I've ever heard of it. So
My apologies. I talked to a lot of different people, and maybe it was just by accident I stumbled across it on one of our previous conversations. But maybe
me.
you have a new girlfriend. You stay away from my Pi AI. She's mine. Okay. Don't tell my wife.
This goes into a whole area that I don't think we should even touch at this point. But I just wanted to point out, since you brought it up and all, right?
Yeah,
let's look down here and tell me about Michael Bolton, the tester, because you gotta be specific. You can't be anything like that. All right, so I go philosophy. So now, give me biographical information about him. I mean, this part is pretty, not too bad. Not too bad. Let's look here, though. Give me biographical information about him. Respected figure, software. Okay. Early career, diverse educational background that includes studies in psychology. Wrong. Music. Wrong. My early career was not in software testing. He transitioned to the field through roles that required a clean analytical mind and problem-solving skills. That's true, I guess. Was somewhat unconventional. He leveraged his background in psychology, which I did not have, his passion for critical thinking to bring a unique perspective to the field. So it says I'm founder, DevelopSense, but
Is that true?
Oh yes, it is. That's
Okay.
that's correct. But I want to say, okay, strong interest in music. I have background in music theory and performance. Not true. I am at this point a pretty decent Irish traditional music banjo player, but I don't have a background in music theory and performance. I do have a background in theater, but of course, since it's not on the web, this is, the AI is completely ignorant
The
about
word
what my actual background was in theater. So it makes shit up.
it's hallucinating. It
It
is.
is hallucinating. So anybody who believes that it's not hallucinating anymore can just take that. Anyway, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to this. And we're going to go to the thing that I actually prepared very recently for this presentation or for this little meetup. And it wasn't going to be like this, except that yesterday, the day before, a colleague contacted James and me wanting to learn something about automation and wanting to learn something about PyTest. So what you're going to see here is some observations on the nature of secret life and an experience report, which I hope will illuminate that to some degree. So let's have a look. First question is to ask, wait a minute, why would there be secret processes of any kind in testing or in automation work? And there are lots of different replies that one could offer. A lot of people being asked struggle sometimes to explain their processes because they've never really noticed it before. They've never thought of it before. They just do stuff. They apply gobs of tacit knowledge. They apply their experiences, and they don't necessarily reflect on them. We do things, and we don't necessarily think about it or contextualize it that much. I've noticed lots of times when I've asked testers in classes and in consulting work to describe what they're doing, they struggle at doing that because they don't have words for it. They don't have notions of it. They don't have mental models of it. Then, even if they do, the person to whom they're describing the process doesn't necessarily get it. Because in order for you to have a conversation, a description of things that make sense, you've got to articulate it to somebody who has a shared set of feelings and mental models about it, and that's not always available. Lots of managers, for example, do not have experience in testing. They've not seen good testing before. They have a notion, an image in their mind of what automation is like. We'll return to that idea. Everything's nice and clean and tidy, but there's a lot of mess there, and they don't necessarily do that. Now, one of the tools that we used in our little experiment, this is with James and a friend of ours. We videoed it. It took us about 3 hours to go through this very small exercise. It was a learning experience. So somebody who is skilled wouldn't have run into some of the trouble we ran into. But James himself is a highly experienced and skilled automator, and we kept banging into these issues. But we got a video. And the cool thing about a video is that we can look at it and we can analyze it kind of like the game film from a sports game. But we can't necessarily do that all the time. It's intrusive, and sometimes it tends to put people on their defensive. So you could take notes. But as you're taking notes, it's really easy, in my experience, to get into a mode where something that fascinates you. Oh dear, what's going on here? It says, oops, connection lost, reconnecting. They corroborate the connected. Yes. I don't know what's interrupting me because I have very little going on at the moment that is not related to this. Anyway, I'm going to pick up where I saw that message. The message was around the time of taking notes. Sometimes when we're engaged in the hunt for a problem or engaged in some analysis, these two parallel threads of work that we've got, one is focused on doing the work and the other is focused on narrating it, that gets lost, which is, by the way, a really great reason that you might want to do a lot of pair work. It's handy to have somebody annotating and describing what's going on while somebody else drives and both people are making observations and so on. But you get somebody focused on the accounting for the work, that can clear up, at least address to some degree, the problem of taking notes. But James and I have noticed a lot of the time, one of us is in one mode, one of us is in the other. We both end up getting so involved in the hunt. Now, next thing, of course, is to some degree, people don't really care about the details. They just want the output. In my case, I don't program every day, all the time. I have experience as a programmer. It doesn't really float my boat. I get irritated by some of the things that you'll be seeing a little bit later. But I would have to say, if somebody watched me writing code, I would find it kind of embarrassing. Or if they were supervising me, they might say, is this guy really competent or what? Some people have a mission that prompts them into stuff that might be focused on things that the developers do. If they're worried that if they describe their processes, that it might be considered irrelevant or not worthwhile. Some people are in the process of maintaining code, that's their job, and they're inheriting stuff that they didn't actually write. This is something that we kept encountering. All the things that we encounter as we go through the process, we don't know when those things are going to get done. It's very hard to generalize about the way we do things because each task is different. Each task is context sensitive. Sometimes, unrelated to the story I'm about to tell, James encountered a problem in some code that we use to set up stuff for our classes. And I'm a Rubyist, and James is at this point a Pythonista. And he was getting the kind of error codes and error messages that made it really, really hard for him to debug. And of course, since somebody else wrote the code, that is to say me, he struggled to try to figure out what the problem was. And even I struggled to find out what the problem was. And I remembered that at some point I'd done a brutal hack and I put that into some code that I wrote. Who has the time to read all the documentation to learn how this stuff works? And a lot of the time the documentation isn't even there. So to kind of sum up these things, why might there be secret processes? Part of it has to do with the fact that we have to muddle through without being aware of what we're doing, or we have to have the vocabulary for that. Recording data about testing takes time, it takes training, it takes discipline, it takes trust, and you never know what might be germane to the task that you're performing. You never know in advance what would be a good thing to take note about, what would be relevant about. I have never even put anything up on GitHub. How about that? And the reason that I've not done that is because I'm shy about the quality of my code, and I haven't got around to it. But I don't want to put it up in its present state. One of the most useful things I've ever written is still private to me. It's a macro processor. Even I feel kind of awkward about that, but today's going to be different because we're going to go through some of the stumbling that we went through. There's a lot of tacit knowledge involved in testing, and tacit knowledge by definition is knowledge that has not been made explicit. It's stuff that happens in my mind. It's stuff that I can explain to other people, but it takes time to do that, and it takes a relationship between me and them in order to do it. And finally, a lot of the time, people on either side of the conversation don't see the value of the description and the and the interaction. People hire me to do testing so that I don't have to think about testing. People hire automators to write automation so those people don't have to think about doing that. In fact, people engage individuals and organizations to write software so they don't have to write the software. And the conversations about that might not be at all interesting to the client. So all these things are in play. All of these things are in play. So that leads sometimes to a fear loop. They, some anonymous they, some a tool vendor, some authority on automation, on testing, they, whoever they are, say it's easy. So, as it turns out, things aren't as easy as they say it is, or this particular task might be more difficult. And if it is hard, managers, peers, colleagues might not believe that it's hard, that this is something that happens in the mind of people. And therefore, there's a locked closet of secret work that's not been talked about, not being described. But to the outsider doesn't see the mess, doesn't see the sausage being made, doesn't see the shit being put into the bottle. And based on the results, it looks easy. Now, sometimes a consequence of that is that the easy looking automation is to some degree dazzling. And even though it was really hard to produce, but all kinds of stuff flies by on the screen, and the person who is observing it from the outside isn't getting a handle on just how difficult it can be. So here's the story of what we did the last couple of days. Our colleague, let's call him. It's not. Is well. Let's just call him Bill. Wanted to learn something about how to test an API, how to do it using Python. So James suggested that we go to congress.gov, open site, and I had a look at it, and I looked down the screen here, and I said, well, what can we look at? What would be a nice, easy call to make? Aha! Oh, look, there's the member returns a list of congressional members. That's good. We can look at that. Maybe we can do some data analysis with it because we use automation to retrieve the stuff. We use other kind of automation to look at the data and parse it and analyze it and see if we can find some behaviors or problems in it. So, oh, look, there's an example. If you press on get there, you get an example. Okay, this is kind of cool. There's some links here that you can see, and image stuff, and the name of the person, and their district, and all that, their party. All right, so this would be kind of cool. So we tried doing that. We wrote a little routine just to go out and make the call, and then we wrote an assertion in our code to look for green in the output. Why green? Well, I just looking in my own knowledge and memory of U.S. Congress. I live in Canada. I'm not a U.S. citizen, or I am a U.S. citizen. I live in Canada. I'm a Canadian citizen too. I'm not that interested in, well, I'm pretty interested, I guess, in U.S. politics. So Marjorie Taylor Greene, I know she exists. She's a representative. When we looked at the output, it wasn't there. Plus, it seemed like the response that we got back wasn't that long. So what's the issue? When we looked at the documentation on congress.gov, what we saw was this. There's a limit. Maximum limit of fields returned is 250. Okay, so I guess what we got to do is we got to do a successive calls to the API, starting at 250, and then we go up to I guess the 538 members of Congress that are actually there. Okay, cool. Although in the records we saw, one of the things that we noticed at the very end was that the number returned was 2,000 some odd. But then we looked and we saw, current members. Okay, the status of the member, use true or false. Okay, so we added true to this, and then we were getting 220 or 2,200 records available to us. And then when we ran the call, we realized, okay, we're getting more than current members. We're getting past members of Congress as well. So there we go. When we included the current member parameter, and when we made the first call, to the first 250, we got green in the results. Okay, so get the rest of the members the easy way. First, just call the function 3 times with 3 different offsets from 0, and then from 250, and then from 500, and that should give us all 538 members of Congress. And then we could look at the data with JQ, except for a problem. Now I'll look in the comments here and see if anybody can identify what the issue here is. What is the issue in this? Does anybody see what the problem is? Because see, when we ran JQ threw up and said, JQ is a tool for querying JSON files. Think of it as a sort of enhanced kind of a grep that allows you to probe into JSON files and see interesting things about them. But this particular file was choking JQ. Anybody see what the problem is? Well, it took us ages. It took us quite a while to realize, well, not too long to realize that the problem was some kind of encoding problem, because when we looked at the file in a text editor, we could see that this was a strange a couple of things. And James, with his tacit knowledge, realized that what we were looking at was probably an encoding problem of some sort. And that's what that's all about there. That's what that little unprintable characters are. So we did all kinds of stuff to try to turn the coding into UTF-8. And there's another thing that we'd run into too, and that was we wanted to grab the API key from the environment. It's a good practice a lot of the time in in Python. If you're going to publish the code, you don't want to hard code your API key in there just in case somebody else finds it, the security problem. So these little hiccups that we found, because the set command wasn't working the way we thought, it turns out that at some point when I had upgraded PyCharm, this had happened. This had happened. And the issue was that somewhere along the way, PyCharm had made PowerShell my default shell. So when we went to the terminal in PowerShell, or in PyCharm, we were getting these, I would type set and it wouldn't return the normal stuff. So we had to fix that and change it to command. So, and maybe that was affecting the encoding somehow or other. Yeah. So, anyway, switching to the normal command shell made that problem go away. We were starting to get a normal UTF-8 encoded file. And we started looking at it. JQ is, here's a little bit of JQ syntax here. You go get the file, that one, which we piped or redirected to the output from our program. We redirected to a file, and you can get the name. And it's returning 549, or if you look in terms of unique records, 550 individual records, 549 of which are unique based on the name. So that was kind of weird. What's going on there? In order to test an API using tools, we can't just look for a 200 and expect that everything's okay. We can't just do that. We can't settle for that, it seems to me. What we've got to do is we've got to look at what's being returned and analyze it and learn about it and try to understand it and try to see if there are any other problems. So we're getting more records than we should. There should only be 538 members of Congress. How do we know that? Well, I know that, at least in part, because of that polling service and polling site associated with Nate Silver, 538. 538. Why 538? Okay, it's because there's 100 senators and there's 438 representatives. So you add that up, that's 538, but yet we're getting 550 records back. James had a theory. Let's see if George Santos is still in there. See if Santos is in there, because he's no longer a member of Congress. Sure enough, though, he's in the field, or he's in the data. So when we looked at that data, we found out that there are non-members of Congress who are coming back reported as being members of Congress. What about this? There is also a duplicate, right? You saw the unique call to JQ there. There's a duplicate, Robert Menendez. Now, again, because of my awareness of U.S. politics, I knew Robert Menendez had been or had resigned in disgrace, corruption reasons. So not only is he in there, he's in there twice. So when we look at the JSON in a text editor here, what do we see? Robert Menendez, Democrat from New Jersey, House of Representatives, start year 2023. Hey, wait a second. He's started in 1993 and ended in 2000. What's going on here? Oh, he became a senator in 2006. His son, as it turns out, is also a representative, Robert Menendez Jr. The junior doesn't show up here, and the senior doesn't show up here. So we were being fooled. It turns out there are two Robert Menendezes, and they're both Democrats from New Jersey. And our assumption up until that point had been that there was an error in the data and that somebody was in there twice. Turns out two people with the same name. Now, if we were Congress people, we would know that there were two Robert Menendezes in Congress, but we didn't have that piece of tacit knowledge until we searched out the explanation for this, until we saw the data and we tried to make sense of it and analyze it. What I'm trying to underscore here is that automation is not the be-all and end-all. This is not all that we're doing. Automation is only a means of getting certain parts of the testing work done. We've got to analyze and reason about what we're seeing if we want to find the interesting problems. Clicking on the senator's bio returns a 404. And we also had to figure out the differences between, a little typo there, between what the API had returned to us, which is 549 members, and the 11 that were seemingly in excess of the 538. Well, it turns out in the current members API call, there are non-members of Congress being returned. Some have resigned. At least one, Dianne Feinstein, is dead. But notice this, the documentation doesn't help us to clear that up. This is all that the documentation tells us about what's going to come back from this. It doesn't tell us whether a current member, that current member field that I showed you before, it doesn't tell us whether that refers to somebody who was a member of the current Congress or is currently a member of Congress. That distinction could be meaningful. Now, of course, I bet most of you are not today engaged in testing the congress.gov API site, API endpoint. What I want you to know, what I want you to remember though, is this kind of pattern of stuff. In particular, whatever you are looking at in your API, there are going to be assumptions made about that stuff by the people who are using the API that may be different from the people who wrote the API, who are collating the data, who are curating the databases. When you ask about something, the answer that you get might not be the answer that somebody else is anticipating. And the documentation here doesn't help. It doesn't outline what constitutes a current member of Congress. And we had a look to see, we couldn't find that distinction being made anywhere. So my assumption, based on experience and based on reasoning, is that what we're referring to is not current members of Congress, but members, including ex-members, of the current Congress. So in order for us to determine whether this is what somebody wanted, we would have to go to some authoritative oracle who is responsible for building and maintaining this site and the data and so on. But from the perspective of somebody who is seeking this information, somebody an outsider to the building process, it's not clear from whatever's being provided what they are going to get, what they expect, what they should expect, what they desire, what they anticipate. So the documentation also doesn't tell us about the pagination key in the JSON, because there is a pagination key that comes back. And inside that, there's a next key, which would have been really useful for developing the code, because we just would have repeated in a loop that calls to make the original code. So here's something that I would like to suggest very strongly to those people who are testing APIs and who are using automation to do it. Examine the documentation and look at what's there and what's missing, and how what your experience is confounds what's there in the documentation, and report that as a problem if it's inconsistent. Maybe the API is right, and your impression is wrong. Maybe your impression is right and the API is wrong. And maybe the documentation doesn't match one or the other. That's going to be a problem for somebody at some point. It could be a problem for the maintainer. It could be a problem for the person who's trying to use the API. And what this gets to is that when we're testing something, we are not just testing the functionality of it. We are also testing the data. We're testing the beliefs that various parties might have about it and the consistency of the relationships between those perspectives and those beliefs. That's far more than just checking to see if we get a 200 response. This process, the process that I've described in a fairly shortened form, took us something like 3 hours. In fact, the video that we started recording the video about 10 minutes into it, and the total length of the video is 3 hours. A lot of back and forthing, a lot of experimenting, a lot of stumbling. And the trouble is that the vision of automation is something like this, a nice, clean, tidy tower, when the reality is more like this. There's mess. There's confusion. There are bugs. There are problems in the tooling. There are updates all the time. Nonetheless, we must plunge in and try stuff. And we've got to make it clear to our clients, to our colleagues, that we're not going to get it right the first time. And sometimes it might be a good idea to underline that, because people very easily take the idea, automation's got to be easy. It's got to be easy because look how quickly it returns a result. Yes, but what did it take to get to that point? We got to start by doing something, by trying something. Anything that is done both well and efficiently starts by being done poorly and inefficiently. That's our conjecture. That means getting it right the first time means either that it wasn't right, or it wasn't the first time, or that it was trivial, easy, or that you got lucky. But what actually happens in the real world, not the fantasy world promoted by certain tool vendors, not the image that presented by people who say automation's easy, you just got to write some code. We always begin in confusion before we can end in precision. In rapid software testing, we call that necessary confusion. Confusion for which we don't have an algorithmic way of resolving the confusion. In order to do that, we've got to, if we want to do really good testing to find problems in any kind of API and using any kinds of tools and getting experience with those tools, we've got to explore complex spaces using methods that may or may not work, a lot of stumbles, a lot of things that provide us with shortcuts, but the shortcuts sometimes don't work. Heuristics, fallible means of solving problems, and we've got to recognize as part of the process of working through necessary confusion that there are limits to what we know and to what we can know until we get some experience with it. And that always occurs during learning and innovation. I think it's important for us to make that not secret, because no script that we write will be written perfectly, immediately, always in a reliable kind of way. We can never be sure that we're going to be able to do it, and it can't take us directly to each unknown bug. To some degree, we've got to play and puzzle and be patient if we want to find the problems in the product that are hidden, that are subtle, that are data related instead of happy return value from a API call. Or to put it the other way, if we just write a bunch of test scripts for a new product or for an old product that we're encountering for the first time, without exploring the product and preparing our mind, our testing will be systematically blind to important bugs that could be there. So you can learn stuff about testing in advance. That helps to avoid some unnecessary confusion. You can learn about the technology, about the domain of the product and of the space that the product inhabits in advance. That will help to avoid some more unnecessary confusion during testing. But we can't deeply learn about this stuff until we encounter and interact with it. And a lot of people, it seems to me, they want to just deny that that is necessary and that it's going to happen. And yet it's healthy and it's important if we want to develop deep understandings with products that we're about to inflict on our customers. So it looked like a nice, easy little experiment to help somebody learn how to make an API call. And our ideas about how to look at it and how to evaluate it, they were naive. Naivete is something that we're always working our way through. We wanted to demonstrate something easy for our friend, for our colleague, but what we found was that there's more to this than meet meets the eye. So you relax from the outset, relax your emphasis on testing to search for problems. Wrap your mind about the product, explore, experiment, get experience with it. Write some throwaway code. The earlier versions of the code that we wrote are kind of crappy. We made a single call to the API. We got some results back, and then we just made 3 successive calls after that and gathered the data. Now, eventually, as time went by, we refined it and refactored it, and now we've got a nice, tidy thing that involves a single script, and we've tidied up the code. Don't worry about that at first. Don't worry about getting it right the first time. But here's another thing that is part of the secret life of automation that it's one of the things that drives me bananas, because I don't automate every day. I've got other stuff to do. I do it when I need to, but if I leave my tool stack alone for a little while, what do I find? In fact, the very first thing that we did is I started to build this thing. I was doing the driving, and our friend was watching, and James was commenting and steering and guiding and so on and so forth. Pip install over and over again. I had upgraded PyCharm only a few days earlier. So some of the things that I was seeing in the new version of this were new to me, and that involved stumbling blocks all the way along. So it turns into a kind of Red Queen's race. You've got to run as fast as you can just to stay in the same place. That sort of stuff comes with a cost. And the cost is that the time you spend investigating and working with your tech stack is time that you're not going to be able to spend on actually testing and interacting with the product directly. It's the cost of doing business, and it's a cost that we must pay, that's worth paying. But let's just remember that that cost is there. When people talk about how wonderful automation is, a lot of the time what they're talking about how quickly it runs certain things in a confirmatory kind of way. But there's a problem with that. Two problems. One is that people generally don't account very well for the development and maintenance and interpretation and investigation and analysis time. What they want to see is just fast output. And the fast output tends to be confirmatory. So this is where I'm going to end up. Most of, say, Kirk and Miller in this wonderful book called Reliability and Validity in Qualitative Research, with a title like that, why isn't it flying off the shelves at the airport? That's what I want to know. But most of the technology of confirmatory non-qualitative research in both the social and natural sciences is aimed at preventing discovery. The checks that we run, we get a good feeling about them when they all go green. And that's a problem. That's a problem because we like seeing green. It's nice. It doesn't cause controversy. And that means that what we're seeing is kind of reassuring without being educational, enlightening. In fact, as Kirk and Miller says, confirmation is exactly the absence of a new insight. We learned things over and over and over again, mostly by accident. The learning that happens is in consequence of mistakes. I don't see very many people talking very much about how they stumbled, how they ran into obstacles. And we need to do that for several reasons. One is to help people recognize this stuff is actually a lot harder than people say it is, so that when they're learning it, they can understand that the confusion will eventually lift to some degree. There's always going to be new sources of confusion, but the things that are unfamiliar to us, we've got to relax into those and accept the fact that confusion is going to be present and that it will lift. But another thing that we got to do, it seems to me, is we've got to make it clear to management. that this stuff is harder than it looks and that it takes time. And that time is time that we're going to need if we are going to learn and discover important things about the product, including important things about problems in it and important things about how to test it too. So I'm done with the formal part of the presentation. And I am open for questions. Hey, Paul, you're back.
Hey, I'm back. Been hanging out here, taking notes, all sorts of cool stuff, and did some cross promotion for you and James's book.
Which is not out yet. Notice that it's not released. We are working diligently on it.
Well, Amazon says different.
Amazon says it's available for pre-order or something.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, my book's been out there since November, so I take different things on that. I promote whatever I can. I try and help you guys any way.
Yeah, you see, but here's the thing. Writing a book, it all looks so nice and easy because you see the ship in the bottle if you're the reader. But Paul, what torture it is to go through to both to write a book,
yep,
and also to face the fear that by the time the book comes out, the world will have changed, because it's a long process to write a book, isn't it?
The world changed in the middle of that book because that's when AI, ChatGPT, all got released right in the last 2 months of it, which, you already know the hallucinations. I was asking questions. I'm like, I already know that's not right. And although some of it was very, very useful, I did want to, let's see, I don't see a whole lot of questions. I'm going to remind everybody, you can ask questions over here for Michael. I don't see a bunch coming up yet, so I did want to mention. Yeah, go ahead.
What's sort of interesting about this is, as I go through this, I'm energized and fascinated and looking back on the experiences that I had, in that little 3-hour session. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this must be like watching paint dry for people who weren't involved in that. But that's a real problem when we're talking about automation stuff, because the excitement, the engagement that we get in the hunt, in the pursuit for problems and in the learning and stuff, there's 2 kinds of people. Well, 3 kinds of people. One is, yeah, I knew that already, right? Well, they can take a hunt, right? The other is, wow, that looks really intriguing, but I can't make head or tail of it. And another is, what is it? I'm just boring. This is like really detailed stuff. That's a problem that we have in talking about development work and automation work as well, which is the process of making. It's like watching Congress. The process of making laws is a lot less interesting than the laws themselves, and even those are pretty tedious to read through. And the consequences are what's really interesting.
Yep. We do have a question over here, and I'm a little out of date with the news. So they're asking, are there any lessons to learn from the Boeing Starliner situation? Are you aware of what that happens to be?
I'm not frightfully aware of it. What is there? Is the problem? Is this referring to the astronauts that are stranded? There's some astronauts up there that apparently now, they were supposed to be up there for like pretty short time, maybe 3 weeks, and now they're looking at 8 months.
Yeah, and I believe they announced that SpaceX is going to launch their system up, so they have a backup plan. SpaceX is going to get up there and take it down.
They get up there and they find these people going, food.
Turns out there's no chicken wings floating in space nearby. There's no trees, no fruit.
In any case, I'm not qualified to talk about Starliner. I haven't looked into it. Okay. I haven't studied the situation, so I will respectfully decline that question.
Not a problem. There's a few other coming in. I will mention one thing. So I I think I kind of knew. Well, we already talked a little bit about AI. One of the advantages I see in AI is that you mentioned it is that you look and see if there's documentation, even if documentation is there. And you also mentioned that doing coding, being a developer takes discipline. One of the discipline things I look for is my developers actually putting a header on a function? Are they documenting the code? Are they making it self-documenting so it's fairly reasonable to understand when the next guy comes along? Um, One of the advantages I've seen is just if there's no documentation, I can run it through an AI and say, please document this so I know what the heck's going on. I don't have to spend a few hours. With the caveat, to watch out for hallucinations. That's just making stuff up.
But it's not just hallucinations.
Yeah.
It's not just hallucinations. Let's remember that AI has none, goose egg, social competence. So it can project in a certain kind of way based on patterns in its training data. It can project what maybe some person was trying to do when they commented code in a similar way, or if there's similar patterns of next things that follow this and that follow that. I mean, a human can reason his or her way through that stuff. I would not rush to an AI's explanation of this sort of stuff. It could be helpful, but it's if I'm going to work with this stuff, I've got to know it. So, a hint might be okay, but let's also remember that hallucination is not the only kind of problem that can be set an AI, especially large language models. What can I do to illustrate that? Let's do a new tab here. And if I go to XLLMs, here are some syndromes. I'll put this up on the screen that we have identified. And some of these, shift a little bit. Like, for instance, there you go. You seeing that yet? Not yet, I guess. There we go.
Awesome.
Okay. When we run something past a human, a colleague, a collaborator, somebody more skilled than ourselves, one of the things that they'll do is ask questions and try to clarify what they're supposed to be doing. AIs do not generally do that. If we ask an AI for something and we ask, are you sure? A lot of the time the AI will say, oh, and we've all seen this, yeah. I'm sorry for any confusion. I apologize for any confusion. Yep. Hallucination is on the list. Sometimes AIs will review, LLMs will emit from their training data. Now, let me make clear something else too while we're at it. It is easy for me to conflate a chatbot that includes an LLM as part of its processing and an LLM. So when I refer to LLMs in this context, I'm referring it to the whole system of the chatbot.
And just for clarification, when you say LLM, it's a large language model, right?
A large language model is a bit of code that takes input, transforms it into output. Okay. And the input that it gets might be filtered through various kinds of processes that happens before that. It might, in the case of, let's say, I observed this in Bing Chat a while ago before it turned into Microsoft Copilot and whatever it's going to get turned into next week. I observed a number of times when I was using that through Skype that the output from the LLM part of it, so I can infer, was getting erased and replaced in Skype by something else, usually a denial that it was allowed to talk about this kind of thing. Now, in a blog post that I wrote on this subject, one of the things that I mentioned was that LLMs sometimes do that. In that blog post, I elided, skimmed over the difference between the actual large language model and the system in which a large language model is embedded. My point on that, my argument on that is that the end user doesn't know or doesn't care about the internals of that. The end user is going to process in his mind or her mind the output, and how it got there is a black box to that person. So these are some of the other things that LLMs can do, and notice that it can be incorrect. It can be forgetful, because sometimes during it should be well known that if you go away and come back to a site, it won't remember its earlier input unless you go back to that conversation. It doesn't give any reasoning about its answers. Sometimes it doesn't answer the question that's actually provided in the prompt. So there's lots of things that can go wrong with this stuff. So when people talk about hallucination, that is definitely a problem. It seems to me, though, that it'd be a really good idea to remember that there are other kinds of pathologies, bugs, incompletenesses, forgetfulnesses, capriciousnesses, and so on that can be part of a response from an AI. And now, maybe it's helpful. Maybe it will help you trigger some ideas in your own mind. But let's remember this other thing. I want to provide a citation to it. Maybe I'll do that in the chat.
You could do that. Yeah. I was going to say, copy that URL. Actually, that's last you had up there. Throw it up in the chat. While you're doing that, I'll
how do I do that? I can see the chat.
I'm sorry. I'm an idiot. I'm thinking I'm on Slack. Actually, it's pasted through the URL. I tell you what, Michael, why don't you send me some links to? I'm trying to think of which email I have. Gosh, which one should I use?
Wait, am I not allowed to chat? Oh no,
no, you can. I'm doing some support behind the scenes here, but there's no chat inbox in what you're seeing on that. That's the first thing I learned a long time ago. Is that you have to be logged into the either the YouTube channel or the LinkedIn channel.
The presenter on this restream thing, the presenter can't contribute to the chat.
I have not found that. Oh, but you can paste it into the private chat. Do that to me. I'll get it out there. I got your back.
All right. So there's a link to the syndromes.
You got it. Thank you.
But who tested this? Who designed this? But then who tested
feature,
this?
Not a bug.
I'm sure they said, "Oh, that's not a problem." But that would be a complaint that I would have as a presenter using this system. Why am I not able to do that? That seems pretty basic. So anyway, thank you, Paul, for relaying that. Now, you had another question about something else?
Well, actually, we've run out of time. I was going to say, give my apologies to David and Eugene. Everybody's got a couple extra questions. Michael, is there a place that they could send questions directly to you that, if they want to ask after the session?
I'm available on all kinds of things. I mean, my email address is Michael at DevelopSense.com. So I'll put that in the chat too. How about that?
And by the way, everybody, I've been working in AI for a year. I've gone whole hog on it. And I got to tell you something. Michael's link that he has over there, and he pointed out a few points. Somebody else is actually looking at that very closely, because a couple of things, especially the memory, they're actually putting stuff like that in there. It's a good point. And at least Claude, I can tell you this, Claude has a memory on it that has gotten much better. And
some have enormous context window. Yeah, well,
but it's 1 out of 10 things out of there. I'm not arguing with you. There's 9 other things that can definitely go wrong on it. And you're making a great point.
The context window is something that you have to account for. That's all. And if you've got a huge context window, that's great. And it forgets less as a consequence of that. But it's a factor that is important to understand. I would recommend having a wee look at this delicious book.
And it's backwards. Deep understanding deep language. It's reverse.
Deep learning.
It might be reversed on it's there, but
is there a way to do this? There's a reverse camera setting here.
It's okay.
Mirror camera, no. Ready? There we go.
Hey, you got it.
Yeah.
And who's the author? Simon Prince.
Yeah, majestic volume. And what blows me away about this book is it's gorgeous. There's all kinds of really nicely colored stuff there. There's graphs and illustrations of things, all kinds of stuff in here. And I've been having a great time with this book. Got it a couple months back, and it outlines all kinds of deep learning things, not just large language models, not just transformers.
Awesome. Cool. I'm going to get a copy myself. Everybody, by the way, these sessions are recorded. So in case you missed it, you can go back to the video recording on YouTube and pick up the books that we mentioned. I've copied a few things out there. One other last thing I'm going to mention with you, Michael, is one of the other items you said is that it doesn't really ask questions. If anyone goes to, I'm not recommending this AI. It's just funny. I mentioned at the beginning that I thought you had mentioned it from a roundtable we were on, which was Pi AI. It's like pi.ai. And I will tell you something, that thing where you said it doesn't ask questions, that's all it does is ask you questions. And it gets annoying. I was actually trying to have it do something for me. He goes, I don't really do that. I just ask a bunch of questions. I'm like, you're useless.
Well, but I don't think so. And let me tell you why I don't think that's useless.
Okay.
Because of the role that any idea generation thing has for us. Anything that we use, a book, a program, a chatbot, they're not necessarily useless. But what they depend on is what you bring to the table. That's key. What's key? And here's one that I would like everybody.
And just to let our moderator know, we're going to wrap up in like 2 minutes here. I love talking to Michael here. He always has great stuff, and I sit down in conferences when he's on them. Go ahead.
Please put that link, the one I just sent you, put that in there, because despite my attempt to get the whole world to look at it, this is not written by me, by the way. This is written by a guy named Baldur Bjarnason. He did something that annoyed me immensely, which is he beat me to a much better post than I had written so far. This is a really, really good breakdown on how LLMs are just like a mentalist, just like somebody who's good at doing cold reading. And the thing about, do you do that stuff?
I do. I have a little background from college for about 20 years in magic. I know a lot about cold reading, and I idolize Penn and Teller.
Okay, well, I idolize Penn and Teller too. A guy named Ian Rowland was introduced to me as a keynote speaker for the 2013 Eurostar conference, and I've had several conversations with him. He's written a book called the Full Facts Book of Cold Reading, I think is what it's called. Ian Rowland, Rowland is the guy's name. And it breaks down exactly how cold reading works. And if you look at it, large language model chatbots exploit exactly the same things, because we bring into a cold reading, the subjects bring into a cold reading all kinds of stuff where they're filling in the stuff that the cold reader is describing.
Yep.
And we see that as insightful because we don't notice the ways in which we're contributing to the conversation. And I think that is most of the reason that people got so excited about LLMs. That when the transformers really started to accelerate in December 2022 or so, we got excited about that, as though we were sitting at a cold reading and say, wow, this thing is insightful. But with time, we grow to realize there's a whole bunch of tricks, and there's a whole bunch that we bring in to fill in the blanks that a chatbot isn't supplying. Yep. That makes it appear insightful. So all it has to do is introduce one little detail that we hadn't thought of and said, oh, it's brilliant. But of course, it's not doing that because it's insightful. It's doing that because there's a whole bunch of shit in its training data that happens to coincide with something that interests us. You know what else we don't notice? All the other crap that is inaccurate or that is irrelevant or excessive. People get overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that goes by and they don't look at it very carefully. There's all these kinds of things that allow us to fool ourselves into believing that these things are way more insightful than they really are, which is, by the way, zero. They're not insightful at all. They're based on accumulated knowledge of accumulated text, not even knowledge, on the web. So there you go.
Thank you.
David and LinkedIn user, please contact me. You can do that on LinkedIn. Ask me in a message and I will tell you what, if you ask me in a direct message, I will provide the response. Or if you at me, I guess, link to me in a public message in LinkedIn, that will come into my attention and I will answer the question in public.
Awesome. Mike, I could talk with you forever. We're already 10 minutes over. It's been a great time speaking with you. I think next time we'll just make these 30-minute sessions and then we'll just spend 30 minutes of QA. I appreciate you joining. We'll have you back again. I will bump into you at another conference somewhere along the way, I'm sure in the near future. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Paul. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And thank you to Apple Tech for hosting this too.
Yes, thank you, Zappletech. And Test Rigger, I want to put that out there. I have to give a little plug to my guys. Testing without coding in plain English. The Holy Grail. Maybe they found it. Check it out. Anyway,
testing without coding in plain English.
You got it, man. Check it out before you. And by the way, 4 years ago, I was unconvinced that it's possible. And then in 17 minutes, the CEO showed me how to write a 10-step automation script. And I wrote 9 of those steps in 17 minutes. I went, okay, you have my attention. So that's all I really want to.
We'll have to talk a little later.
We will talk. You know where I'm at. The Dark Arts Wizard at gmail.com. Look me up. A Dark Arts Wizard. Find the gears. Any one of those social media things, reach out anytime, Michael. We'll talk a little bit more, and I'd be happy to show you a demo. Take care, everybody. Cheers. Thank you so much.
Take care.